this is the wrong side of my sleeve placket. I'm going to push this back. Here you can see all my plackets, all my layers. I'm going to get the house placket away, and I'm going to sew the little triangle, this little triangle onto the under placket. Just do a straight stitch right where that triangle ends. Don't forget to backstitch to secure. Oops. Okay, so what it does is, here it kind of gives you this shape in the back. You know, it keeps the little placket and the little triangle flat on the sleeve. And then all you have to do just now worry about the top placket. And now I'm gonna go 1/16, 1/16, 1/16, and come back. So now all I have to worry about just attaching a placket, because you can see I just stitched my little triangle onto the under placket. Now this is gonna go over, and all I have to worry about just this placket. I'm going to sew 1/16 over the seam allowance, over the stitch. Don't forget to backstitch. Okay, so now see this notch? I'm sure, I hope you guys can see this notch. Let me raise my foot really quick and bring, so this is the notch I'm talking about. It's right there. Okay, so basically it's this notch on this side, okay? So now I'm going to pivot right at the notch. Make sure it's nice straight line. I'm going to pivot towards the house placket and up. Pivot one more time. So now when I pivot this one, you can see how now I have a little bit more than 1/16. That means I have space to do one more stitch. Oops, one more stitch. Now when I pivot, I land exactly at 1/16. So just gonna follow this shape. And you will stop again right at this line on this end. Now if you want to go across, you can. This one is optional. You don't have to really, you know, if you do have that stitch on your design, then you might want to definitely do that. And if you don't, then you shouldn't do that. You always want to follow the sketch that you have, the flat that you're designing from. And I'm going to stop, backstitch, and it's nice and clean on both sides. You can see. Now I am ready to do my pleats and my cuff. Before you get into your cuff, you're gonna have to, this is where you are sewing the underseam of your sleeve. Now remember, on the actual full-size shirt, you will do exactly the same. You do your house placket first, and then you do the underseam, okay? So make sure your sleeve is flat when you're doing your plackets, your sleeve plackets. So here's my seam. I'm gonna sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I did my underseam 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to, you can either press your seam allowance open, or you can press your seam allowance towards the back of your sleeve. Okay, and then I'm going to turn right side out. So it's going to look like this. And here's my cuff. Okay, and here's my cuff. Here you have an inner facing that extends 1/2 inch beyond the folding line. Now your first step is going to be place your right sides together, right side to right side, and you're going to sew 1/2 inch seam allowance here and 1/2 inch seam allowance on this end. So on both ends you're going to sew a 1/2 inch. Before sewing the underseam, I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, just do your pleats. Follow your notches, the pleats that you drafted, follow your notches, and then make sure you fold them just like you drafted, and just do a straight stitch across, keeping them together. A little bit less than 1/2 inch seam allowance. I did a little bit less than 1/2 inch. You can do 1/4, that's fine too, as long as just to keep them there. So here's 1/2 inch. Don't forget to clip your corners. Turn right side out. I like to use a pin or a needle. Just be careful, but don't use scissors or a seam ripper. You want to make sure it's nice and pointy. Nice 90-degree angle, just like that on both sides. Getting ready to sew a cuff. Now you want to make sure that the side that is fused is on the outside, not exposed of course, but the one that's on the outside, meaning the one it's facing you. You want to make sure that the fused side is outside, and then that's not a fused side is on the inside of the sleeve. Now I'm pinning my cuff onto the sleeve. I'm going to start with the top placket. I'm going to place this seam and right where the fold of the placket is, and then I'm going to go all the way around until I reach this other end of my sleeve, to this other end of my cuff. So I'm going to pin all the way, and then I'm going to sew 1/2 inch seam allowance.